comes from Isaiah 7, verse 1 to 17. Verse 1. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not yet mount an attack against it. When the house of David was told, Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook, as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. And the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands, at the fierce anger of Rezin in Syria and the son of Remaliah. Because Syria with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah has devised evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and terrify it, and let us conquer it for ourselves, and set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it." Verse 7. Thus says the Lord God, "It shall not stand, and it shall not come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years Ephraim will be shattered from being a people. And the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. If you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all." Verse 10. Again the Lord spoke to Ahaz, "Ask a sign of the Lord your God, let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven." But Ahaz said, "I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test." And he said, "Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria." This is the word of God.
How many of you guys like Christmas music? Could I get a show of hands? Christmas music, people? Or, by now you're going like, oh, enough with the Christmas music. That's okay if you're there. But hey, no, there's no other Christmas song out there that captures the idealism and the nostalgia of Christmas than this song that was written in 1942, sung by Bing Crosby, "White Christmas." I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, right? Being Christmas, okay, that's enough. Oh, thank you very much. No, please, come on. No, I'm just kidding. You guys, everybody knows this song, right? And it's about, the ideal Christmas. It's about a guy remembering what Christmases used to be like when he was a child, and you get a sense that it was with family and friends. Of course, this is totally from an East Coast perspective. I guess for us Californians, it'll be, I'm dreaming of a partly cloudy, kind of sunny Christmas, but it's about nostalgia, about idealism. It's about not being alone. It's about everything you wish for during the season. Now, in 1957, this man came out with another Christmas song, Blue Christmas. All right, you guys know this song. You've been hearing it. Blue Christmas without you. Okay, that's my Elvis. But anyways, thank you very much. This song is almost the exact opposite of White Christmas, where it's not about nostalgia or the idealistic, nice, comfy Christmas, but it's about a Christmas where a guy, I guess, lost his girlfriend, and so now he's having a Christmas that's full of heartbreak and loneliness. Oh, poor guy. I hope he found someone for Christmas. But anyways, I like to kind of put it out there that in actual reality, a lot of Christmases are actually more often blue than white. If you even think about it, even the writer Irving Berlin, White Christmas, he's thinking back to a time when Christmas was great. That kind of suggests that at that moment, he was spending a very lonely Christmas. And if you ever read the background of the story, that's kind of the story. Irving Berlin was just by himself in a hotel, and that's when he penned White Christmas. We often experience more blueness than whiteness in Christmas time. And that just speaks about a pretty sad epidemic that's going on in today's world. And that is the epidemic of loneliness. A few studies have shown that loneliness is felt the most during the holidays, especially among the elderly who most of the time have no one. And so if you're thinking about going to the Tenderloin this Christmas Day outreach, I really want to encourage you to go and do so, because you will be reaching out to many elderly who just really have no one during Christmas. So think about that, all right? Also, if you ever read the New York Times had an article recently that was entitled, "How Loneliness is Tearing America Apart." And once again, it's citing the fact that every successive generation for the past century has been feeling more and more lonely, according to surveys and experiments that they've been doing. The causes have been pinned on politics, isolating work, social media, what have you. But it's an epidemic, and it's an epidemic that has led to even more sadness and more vice. A lot of responses to loneliness and isolation has been violent, either self-harm or harm to others, or it has been cited as one of the reasons for the growing number of addiction to all kind of things. The fact of the matter is that this world is a very lonely world. People are very lonely nowadays. Some of you may be feeling lonely right now. Some of you may be, for the first time in your life, without a loved one for the holidays. Or maybe it's been the upteenth time that you've been without a loved one, and it really hasn't gotten better. The fact of the matter is that none of us have never been not lonely. Get it? None of us have never been not lonely. All of us have experienced loneliness, whether on the holidays or not. And the thing is that Christmas is often a lonely time for many people. Now, the reason why I bring you to this downer is because I want to remind you that Christmas exists because of bad news. The reason why we have Christmas in the first place is because there is bad news, and the Bible actually tells us that there is actually a deeper reason for loneliness, more deeper than the social media or the politics or the what have you. And the deeper reason is this: is that sinful humanity, because of sin, humanity is since the fall of humankind is isolated. Because of sin, humanity has lived in an isolated condition. First of all, sinful humanity is estranged and isolated from God, and because of this isolation, it has led to every other kind of isolation that we experience today. Remember what we said: God is incredibly angry at sinful humanity. That's what we've been learning in the book of Isaiah. Because of our idolatry, because of our injustice, we have broken the most basic commandments that keep the universe together. We've been called to love God and to love our neighbors, to love each other. And because of sin, we've broken those commandments. And because of our sin, because we do not live according to those two commandments, we are now suffering the consequences: loneliness and isolation. Also from with God, and also from each other. The loneliness and isolation that many of us experience today is only a taste and glimpse of what is in store if humanity continues on this sinful path. But the good news of Christmas is this, and we learned this last week, is that although he's incredibly angry at human sin, although he holds sinful humanity over the fire with a thread, even though God is incredibly angry at sinful humanity, we also have a God who is incredibly in love with humanity. And God refuses to leave us alone. And that's what Isaiah really helps us to understand, especially in the scripture today. So let's go to chapter 7, and let's read verses 1 to 2 right now. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, oh, by the way, there's going to be a lot of historical and Old Testament names in this passage, so we put in a little study guide in the bulletin for you. So in case you get confused, you can just look at it. If you're like, who is this Rezin guy? You could just look at it, and you'll know that he's the king of Aram or the king of Syria. Aram and Syria, same country. Two names for the same country. But let's read Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 to 2. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, don't tell me you didn't want to say it, read it that way too. And Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim, which is Israel, so the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken, as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. We come to a point where Ahaz and Judah are finding themselves alone, surrounded by their enemies, isolated with no rescue in sight. They are surrounded by two powerful kings with two powerful armies who at this point had beaten Judah's armies. Now, up to this point, we've been talking about how Isaiah began his ministry during the time of King Uzziah, which was a great time for the kingdom of Judah. But by the time of his grandson Ahaz, Judah had been weakened incredibly. And the prophets say the reason for this was because Ahaz was leading Judah to unprecedented evil at this point. Now, what was the evil of King Ahaz? Well, if you go back, you could look more about this story in 2 Kings 16 and 2 Chronicles 28. But there it says that Ahaz did not walk in the ways of his forefather, King David. He was a bad guy. His main crime, his main sin was that he brought back idolatry into Judah in a big way. He built all the high places, and he even sacrificed his own children to idols. That's how evil this was. Now, you may be wondering, why would he do this? I mean, he had a good grandfather. He had a good father. He was a descendant of David, for crying out loud. Why in the world is he acting this way? Well, many scholars say that the reason why Ahaz turned to idols was because he was afraid of becoming politically isolated. Once again, here's another guy who is suffering from loneliness and was also afraid of loneliness. See, the reason why he was afraid of loneliness was because you have to understand the time. When we think of Jerusalem, the city that the king lived in, a lot of times we interpret it through our modern lenses, and we go like, oh, the city of Jerusalem, like the modern day city where millions of people live in there. Everybody lives in Jerusalem. It's a big metropolis. Well, not really. That was not how it was back then. Jerusalem was actually a little bit more than a castle and fortress back in the day. So the only people that really lived in Jerusalem was the king and his servants and the people who farmed for them. And maybe his armies. Maybe his number one army was in there. But other than that, Jerusalem was a little bit more than a big fortress that also happened to have the temple of God there. Judah and Israel at this time were rural societies, meaning they were farmers. Everybody lived outside of the city in these villages. And so in order for a king to maintain his power, he needed the support of village and farming chieftains. Now, these farming communities, because they lived away from the temple of God, and because they lived away from the priests and prophets who could teach them the word of God, a lot of them began to get into idolatry. And not only did they get into the worship of other gods, but they began to merge, as we talked about it a few Sundays ago, they began to merge the worship of God with the worship of idols. And there is a fragment, this pottery fragment is actually from a high place that is dated back in the time of Isaiah and the kings of Judah and Israel. And this is actually depicting Yahweh, the God of Israel, married to Asherah, who is the Canaanite goddess. And so here you see this merging of religion and everything. Now, if the king went into these villages and said, hey, you only need to worship God, get rid of these images, get rid of these gods and goddesses, he would have politically isolated himself. All these village chieftains, all these farming heads would have turned against him. And if that happened, then the king would have no army, would have no servants. The king would be weak. The king was very, very dependent on the support of the villages and all these chieftains. And so instead of standing up for the worship of God, Ahaz said, well, you know what? I can't risk being isolated. I can't just tell these people to worship God alone. So the only thing I can do is to compromise and support what these village chieftains are doing. And so because of his fear of being alone, a fear that many of us share, he began to worship these idols to the point that he even got so deep into it that he sacrificed his own children to these pagan gods and goddesses. See, this is the thing. When we experience loneliness, we will do everything in our power to not be alone. That's just how human beings are. We are, by nature, communal, relational beings. And so that's why many of us have a fear of loneliness. That if we find ourselves alone, we will do anything and everything to not be alone. And that's what you see in King Ahaz. He wanted the support of the chieftains, and also he wanted to be like the other countries. He didn't want his kingdom to be isolated from all the other countries. And so he went to these idols. And idols are easy to go towards because idols you can see, and they're also controllable. You can move an idol wherever you want. In fact, you make the idol yourself. And guys, this is not just a problem of antiquity. It's a problem today. What do you do when you feel isolated, when you're in trouble, when you're lonely? Who do you go to? Is your first response going to Jesus, praying to God? Or is it to that comfort, or to that person, or to that thing that makes you feel good? Remember, we talked about idols. Idols are not just graven images, pagan gods, but they're anything and everything we go to other than God for our comfort, for our sense of worth, and also to get rid of loneliness too as well. Why do you think a lot of lonely people become drug addicts or get addicted to something? It's because they're self-medicating. It's because we're self-medicating and trying to get rid of that lonely feeling. See, idols, we can see, idols are immediate, idols are controllable. But God, He's invisible, and He's uncontrollable. And a lot of times you got to just take His word for it, that He's there for you and that He will comfort you. And sometimes for us that comes as cold comfort, because a lot of times God doesn't act at the time we want Him to act. So what is it for you? What is it for you when you feel lonely? Now, in this chapter, it tells us that the king of Aram, or the king of Syria, and the king of Israel came up against Judah and against Ahaz. And a lot of historians say the reason for this was because there was a new power in the east called Assyria. This is a picture of part of an actual archaeological find, a real archaeological find that you can look up on Wikipedia and also in the Biblical Archaeology Review and also any reputed museum. This is a picture from what is called the Black Obelisk. And the Black Obelisk was found in modern-day Iraq. This is a depiction of the king of Syria receiving tribute from the king of Israel. See that guy bowing down low to the king of Assyria? To that guy standing who's kind of facing like this? That is actually Jehu, king of Israel, which you can find in the Bible. Assyria, at this time, which was based in modern-day Iraq, was growing in power, and it was starting to encroach on all the lands west of it. And because of this, Israel and Syria came together and said, we got to join forces and we got to fight Assyria. We got to resist the tyrant together. And Ahaz, being a little politically calculating, said, you know what, Israel, you know what, Syria, I'm going to see what happens because I don't want to pick a fight with Assyria. See, if you see here, Ahaz's true idol to prevent loneliness, to prevent isolation, political isolation, what have you, was actually politics. He went to politics to solve all his problems. And here he was politically calculating. He didn't want to go up against Assyria. And so Syria and Israel said, well, if you won't go up against him with us, we're going to go up against you. And so they started a war with Judah, and they essentially destroyed Judah. The only thing that Ahaz had left was Jerusalem. And they wanted to force Ahaz to either join us, or they were going to kick him off the throne. They were going to do some regime change, and they would put on the throne the son of Tabeel. Now, this is very scary, and all of a sudden, once again, Ahaz is finding himself lonely in a dire situation, and so what is Ahaz's reaction? Ahaz's reaction is that he's distraught. Because if you read in 2 Chronicles about this war, his son, his chief of staff, and his prime minister were all killed in this war, along with thousands of soldiers and people. And a lot of his people were taken captive as well. So how does Ahaz respond to this isolation, to this danger? He goes to his idol of politics. And what he's about to do by the time we see him in Isaiah 7 is that he's about to make an alliance with the king of Syria, just like this guy right here. And so in Isaiah 3-11, the Lord takes note of this and says to Isaiah, go out, you and your son, Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct. And then say to him, be careful, keep calm, don't be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and of the son of Remaliah. Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, let us invade Judah, let us tear it apart and make the son of Tabeel king over it. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will stand not at all. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask the Lord your God for a sign, whether in the deepest depths or in the highest heights. I want you guys to really pay attention to this. Because although Ahaz was at the height of his sin, although Ahaz was running to these other idols, while Ahaz was running to politics, which was his true idol, God still offers rescue to him. God says, hey, you see these guys coming at you? They're going to be destroyed. And God, rather than, God could have totally at this time said, you know what, enough of you, Ahaz, you killed your own children, you've led my people astray, forget you. But in his most deepest need, this evil king got a straight up message from God, and God said, you know what, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to rescue you. Now what say you? You see, God still offers rescue. See, once again, God is incredibly angry at human sin, but God is incredibly in love with you. That regardless of how sinful you are, regardless of how evil you may become, or regardless of how awful you may do things, God still offers you rescue. You see, this is the thing. You can never earn God's concern. You can never earn God's love. You can never earn God's rescue. Nor can you escape it. Because no matter how much Ahaz drifted away from God, God was pursuing him and said, hey, I'm going to rescue you. Do you know why God does this? It's not because of anything we do. He saves because he is a Savior. He gives grace because he's a God of grace. He loves because God is love. And he offers goodness, beauty, joy, comfort, community, family, love, and salvation to you. And all he asks for you to do is to believe. And that's what he does with Ahaz here. Now, what's Ahaz's response to God? But Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Oh, what a pious man. Oh, far be it from me, Lord, to put you to a test. And we know as Christians that even Jesus said that. I will not put the Lord to a test. Oh, what a pious, what a load of BS. You may ask, well, how is this BS? How is this poo-poo? I mean, didn't Jesus say, don't put the Lord to the test? Well, see, different circumstances. Jesus was being tempted by Satan to make himself look great without God, without the Father. And so Jesus said, you know what? I won't put the Lord to the test. This is about him. For Ahaz, God was offering to show his greatness to Ahaz, saying, hey, you know what? I want you to have faith in me, so try me. Ask for a sign and I'll give it to you. I will show to you that I am God. But Ahaz says, no, I don't want it. See, for Ahaz, his God was his politics. His God was those graven images that he was worshiping. He says, I will trust in those things more than I will trust you. He refused to go to God. He preferred his idols. Idols, once again, they're concrete and controllable. And regardless of how much it destroys and hurts you, because how are Ahaz's politics treating him right now? They're not doing anything for him. They're getting him into trouble more and more. But no matter how much it hurts and destroys him, he still goes to it. Because ultimately, all idolatry is the worship of one's true idol, and that is yourself. He's saying to God, no, I got it. Even though I'm scared, even though I'm about to be destroyed, I still got it. Now we look at Ahaz and we go like, oh, what a silly man. How can he do that? What's been your reaction the last time you were in a very desperate time in your life? And when God gave you the help, what was your reaction? Don't say that it was not like Ahaz, because I know you guys. You guys are Asian, at least most of you are. And I have seen Asian people when people offer them help and gifts. No, I'm okay. Oh, you give me this gift. Oh, no, I give you a gift back. We're so, what's it called? Hake, right? We have to hate too much, right? But here God is saying, don't be hake with me, man. Ask me for a sign. And you know what? God, through the prophet Isaiah, gets mad at Ahaz. And you know how God expresses his anger to Ahaz? It's not, forget you, I'll destroy you. No, God says, you don't want to ask me for a sign? Well, I'm going to give you a sign. And I'm going to rescue you. 13:17. Hear now, you house of David. Is it not enough to try the patience of human? Will you try the patience of my God also? Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and we'll call him Immanuel. And essentially what 15-17 says, before this kid grows up, those two kings that are attacking you now, Ahaz, they will be destroyed. You know what? God's going to show his greatness and grace no matter our disobedience. He's going to save. He's going to rescue you. He's going to offer that salvation deliverance for you, even if you don't accept it. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later. But here God tells Ahaz, I'm going to give you a sign, and this sign will be a really crazy sign. The virgin will give birth to a son, and the son will be called Immanuel. Now, before we get all caught up with the whole, virgin giving birth, how is that going to happen? Notice what God calls his son. He calls him Immanuel. And if you've grown up in church, you know what Immanuel means. Immanuel means God with us. Do you see that God gives him the ultimate thing, wants to give him the ultimate thing, and that is his own presence. Like what we've been saying, the absence of God is judgment, hell, and destruction. The presence of God is everything. It's heaven, it's righteousness, it's salvation. And the Bible teaches us clearly from beginning to end, there is no salvation apart from the presence of God. It's God's presence in your life that saves you. Talk more about this a little bit later. But, that's easy for us to understand because it's presence. If we're feeling scared, what's one of the most comforting things? Or we're feeling sad, what is the most comforting things? It's when someone comes right alongside us. They don't even have to say a thing, but if they're with us, you start to feeling that comfort. You start to feel courage, right? You guys remember that I hate roller coasters, right? And you guys know that story that when I was a kid, I was 12 and I wanted to try out my first roller coaster. It happened to be Colossus, which is this huge roller coaster at Magic Mountain. And my dad said, "Hey, I'll go with you." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, come with me." And I felt brave. I was going to do it. And then my brother, who was only 7 or 9 at that time, said, "Oh, I want to come too." And because he came along, my father had to sit next to my brother, and I had to sit with whoever else. And so by the time we got into these carts, I sat by myself, and my brother was sitting with my father, and I was waiting for the next person to sit next to me, so at least I could hold on to them, even though they were a stranger. But the person that was like right after us was just like this girl who was with her boyfriend. And then when the person said, "Hey, do you want to go and sit next to this kid right here?" She went like, "No, I want to sit with my boyfriend." And so I ended up sitting all by myself in the front to go on Colossus. And after that experience, I've never been on a roller coaster again. Until I was 26. And because every youth pastor has to take his youth group to Great America, which is a stupid rule, I had to go on roller coasters again because I can't look weak in front of the kids, But this time, I had a girlfriend, and her name was Vincy, and there was no brother to take her away. No kids at that time to make her sit next to them. She sat next to me all the time. And guess what? I went on all the rides. And I was brave. And I won't do it again. And that's why I'm not youth pastor anymore. But presence. Presence is salvation. Presence is that cure for loneliness and isolation, right? There is no salvation apart what is offered in the presence of God. Now here's the thing, going back to Ahaz here. Some scholars believe that, a lot of people see that in Isaiah 8, 3-4, that this whole virgin birth prophecy was then fulfilled in chapter 8, when Isaiah, who's now writing in first person, said, "I made love to the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son." And so one who was once a virgin, is no longer a virgin, gave birth to a son. And the Lord said to me, "Name him Maher Shalal Hashbaz." I just wanted to read that. "For before the boy knows how to say my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the plunder of Samaria will be carried off by the king of Assyria." So here, Isaiah marries a prophetess. They make love. They have a child, and before that child is even 2 years old, as history shows, Israel and Syria are destroyed by the king of Assyria, and Judah is saved. Now, that is probably the immediate fulfillment of what God promised in chapter 7. Take a note of that. Now, Ahaz, you would think after he saw this, would go like, "Oh my gosh, God is God." But here's the thing. He still went to the king of Assyria. If you go into 2 Chronicles 28, he sold his kingdom out. He became a vassal of the king of Assyria. He became a servant of the king of Syria. And what his failure represented the whole failure of the house of David. Though, you got to understand this about the kings that were descended from the house of David. They were all literal messiahs. You know what Messiah means. Messiah means anointed one. They were all anointed by God to lead and to save the kingdom of Judah and Israel. And even by this time, God had already promised to David that his throne, his house, will last forever. But this is the thing. As seen in Ahaz, none of them lived up to it. See, what happened here is that they lost their sovereignty. Every king after Ahaz from this point forward would become a servant of the king of Assyria. In fact, when they tried to become messiahs and tried to set Judah free, that's what led to the doom of Judah when a new power, Babylon, came in and destroyed it. So here's the thing. They were poor messiahs. They lost everything. In fact, soon after Ahaz, there would be no more throne for David's descendants. There would be no more kingdom, no more armies, no more wealth. And by the time we catch up with David's family, the house of David in the New Testament, they were all then just a bunch of poor carpenters. And once again, I hope you see the parallels with us. God has chosen humanity, each one of us, and has gifted us all specially. He has given us all a plan to do great things for His name and for His kingdom and for His purpose, for the benefit of this universe. And yet, even though God has offered Himself to us, has offered rescue, we, like King Ahaz, still turn away and turn to our own way. And because of that, we lost everything. Now, this brings us back to God's promise of Immanuel. That even though we stubbornly insist to go our own way, God still will not leave us alone, and God still pursues us because we know that a greater sign was given some 2,000 years ago. A greater Immanuel showed up. An Immanuel who was actually the product of a real virgin birth. In Matthew 1, 22-25, it says this: all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Immanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage, unlike Isaiah. And she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus, which means the Lord saves. See, all of this points to the fact that we have been given a sign. That although, like Ahaz, we have turned to our own way, we continue to pursue our idols, God will not let us go so easily. And He proved it to us by giving us the ultimate sign of God with us, a virgin birth which produced a son named Jesus. His name literally means the Lord saves. And guess what? He didn't save like the kings of old. He didn't do it with an army. He didn't do it with his wealth. He didn't do it as a divine king. He didn't do it as some royal warrior. But He did it as one of us. Actually, He did it as the least of us. I mean, have you ever considered the fact that all of us today are a lot more richer than Jesus ever was during His time on earth? Jesus saved through His obedience. Jesus saved by letting go of power. Jesus saved by ultimately giving His life for us by dying on a cross. Jesus saved because He is God with us. He makes God present with us and as one of us. And see, here's the thing. Without God's presence in your life, you do not experience the salvation of God. Jesus has come. He has saved by giving His life. But the only way you experience it is if you have His presence in your life. See, that's the only way all this stuff makes sense. Because without God's presence in our lives, what Jesus did was 2,000 years ago. What Jesus did was thousands of miles away from us. What does that have anything to do with us? Actually, nothing. Because it was in its own time and space. But because God offers His presence to us, if we believe in Jesus, His presence not only comes with us, but it dwells in us. And because of his presence, everything that Jesus did on that cross, becoming one of us, dying on that cross for us, saving us from our sin and loneliness, becomes applicable to us today. That's the only way we benefit from the cross, is having God's presence in us and with us. That's why Immanuel is so important. That's why it's so important that Jesus is the ultimate Immanuel to us. And so the question today for all of you here is, what are you going to do with this? Ahaz had to wait for a sign, but we have been given that sign already. Jesus has come. God is with us. Now, are you going to be like Ahaz and turn to your own way and cling on to what you think works for you? Or are you going to turn to Jesus and grab on to him? That's the message and good news of Christmas. And that's the message that we've been given to give others. Let's pray.